Okay, well, good afternoon. We have Guillaume with us from Louis Michel, and because we didn't get out to the vineyards last year to taste the 2019 vintage, I'm very excited to have Guillaume here to tell us about his thoughts on the vintage in Chablis. Over to you, Guillaume.
Okay. Hello, Harriet. Nice to see you. My thought about the 19 vintage in Chablis, that it's once again, it's a vintage of climate change and global warming. We had, once again, we had a very dry and hot summer season with the heat waves, actually. So, but before that, I have to say that it all started quite normally. But at the end of 2018, we had quite a cold and wet January. So it looked like a winter actually, but suddenly what happened is that in February, the temperature became much more higher than usual. And we even had some temperature around more than 20 degrees Celsius in the afternoon in February, which is absolutely impossible to think before, because it should be the winter. It should be cold, very cold, and almost having some snow at this time of the year. So as you can see, in February it was already signs of not a common usual vintage actually. So what happened is that finally we didn't have a real winter. It was more like a long autumn, endless autumn. And so logically what happened is that in March, despite the quite cooler time in March, we had the first sign of bud break actually. And it's finally, we can say that at the end of March, very beginning of April, everything was after the bud break was everywhere, so which is quite early. So in that situation, the winemaker start to stress, because early bud breaks means more spring frost risk, and that's exactly what's happened in April. Actually, we had some spring frost during the night. We had a temperature below zero, and even it dropped down to -5 degrees Celsius in mid-April in the night. So it was quite stressful. But hopefully the bud were not very developed, so they resist actually. And also we helped them to resist because we decided to light the smudge pot, the candle, what we call the candles, to protect the vineyards. So it helped us to save a little bit of the harvest, but we realized a few months later that we had some damages because of frost actually. So and then after that we had logically an early flower as well. So to give you an idea, usually the flower in the vineyards, it's around mid-June, and this year in 2019 it was more the beginning of June actually that it started flowering. And because this time of the year was also a bit cooler than usual, we had a long flowering time. And long flowering time means also issues of coulure and mirandage then after that, which is another consequence on the yields at the end. And then after that, it was the heat wave. We had two heat waves. First one at the end of June, second one at the end of July, with temperature going more than 40 degrees Celsius for several days. And so despite the fact that the growing season was quite speed at this time, but also we had some damages on the grapes, just like it just burned the grapes actually. So at the end, you can see that it was quite not a very easy vintage for us. So at the end, we finally started the harvest in mid-September. I think we started around the 14th or 15th of September. Quick harvest because it's all finished on the 21st of September. So let's say about 6-7 days of harvesting. We had to go fast. We need to go quick harvest right now because of all this the maturation, because it's very hot. The maturation gets much quicker. So and we have to be careful not to harvest overripe grapes. So the harvest was quite quick. And at the results, the vintage, we could resume 2019 vintage as difficult vintage in the vineyards, stressful vintage in the vineyards. The yields were down by, at the estate, about 25%, especially on the Premier Cru, actually, because the Premier Cru are on the southwest facing part of the vineyards, which means afternoon sun. So the effect of the sunburn is much higher on the Premier Cru than on the basic Chablis or Petit Chablis, which grows more on the north-facing part of the vineyard, so which is more a morning sun. And so, but in terms of wine, I have to say that despite all of this, the wine have, so of course the wine have a very nice concentration. The acidity, we could think that the acidity will drop because of the heat wave and so over maturity, but the acidity is still decent. Total acidity is between 3.5 and 3.8 roughly in 2019, which is more acidity than on 2018, for instance. 2018 was a bit lower. Of course, because of this, we have high alcohol level, which means for us, okay, we are in Chablis, we are in the north. So when I say high alcohol level, I'm talking about 13 degrees of alcohol for the straight Chablis and the straight and the Petit Chablis, which usually are more like a 12.5. So it's not, you know, it's not a very high alcohol level, but for us, it's something it's a bit higher than usual. And on some Premier and Grand Cru, it can go up to 13.5, 13.8 degrees of alcohol, but nothing is above 14 in Chablis at the estate. The wines are, I really enjoy the wines. I think it's because of this acidity that we have and because of this nice maturity. I think the balance is just very interesting. The balance is perfect. You have maybe less vintage effect on the wines that you could have in 2018, for instance, because 2018 the vintage effect was a bit more has more influence on the terroir than in 2019, which means that the 18 should be, you should wait a little bit in the cellar to drink the 18, by the way. And the wine so they have a nice concentration and very nice terroir expression as well in the wines. Yeah, so the south-facing part, which are the Montée de Tonnerre, for instance, which is very southwest. They have a bit more. Of course, they have more concentration than the southeast facing Premier Cru, just like the Mormain, for instance. So the terroir of Montée de Tonnerre expresses very well its concentration, its power, its the complexity actually. So it's very interesting. And on the other side, in Mormain, for instance, or in Forêt, for instance, when it's a cooler area, the finesse of the wine is very present in the wine. So I think that so of course it's young now to taste, but when you taste, I already see and recognize all the different main characteristics of the terroir. So to me, it's the sign of a very interesting and good vintage, because I'm happy when I produce terroir-driven wines, as you can imagine. So the good news is that now, because now we have a little bit of all vintages in that style, you know, with 18. We already had that in 06, for instance, you know, this kind of warm vintage, warm climate vintages. And we're quite happy because I clearly see that despite this global climate change, we still have in Chablis a very strong and very powerful terroir, actually, that is not that much influenced by all the characteristics of the vintage. So it's quite good news for the future.
Thank you. Thanks, Guillaume. That was just really fascinating insight. I think this is what I've heard from a lot of producers about the 19 vintages. The acidity held itself, and I think you put your finger on the button there by saying it's the terroir that holds the acidity rather than the actual wines, and that's the gift of Chablis and Burgundy as a whole, isn't it?
That's what is very interesting, because sometimes when you see the analysis analytically, when you look at the acidity, you will be like, oh my god, it's low. You can't compare to what we were used to have. But when you taste the wine, the sensation in the mouth is not that low. So that's I like to say that it's a part of the magic, you know, of the Chablis terroir. And I clearly remember 2015 vintage, for instance, where the acidity were quite low, but when we were tasting the wine, it was still the wine were still this freshness and the acidity, the perception. So, and that's the most important.
This is it, exactly. And what the other interesting point was the fact that those premier crus on the southwest facing banks are getting more sunshine. Does that mean that perhaps in 10, 20 years time, those premier crus, you know, won't be as good as the ones, or the village sites even on the southeast facing slopes? Will the premier cru sort of setup change, do you think, with climate change, with global warming?
Yeah, we're gonna have a change, you know, and we can think that the premier cru that are the most south facing, they will need a very strong terroir to keep their identity, actually, to fight against this vintage effect on the wines. And there is another good example, is that if you go into the Grand Cru Vaudésire, for instance, our Grand Cru Vaudésire is, because the Vaudésire Valley actually has two slopes, and one slope is north facing in this valley. And that's where our Grand Cru Vaudésire is located. And yes, we can see clearly that the fact that it's north, it helps us a lot to keep freshness in the wine. But also we see that in terms of maturation, now there is a difference compared to what we have back in the past. 25 years ago, when we used to harvest our Grand Cru, roughly everything was ready for pickup at the same time. The Grenouille, the Clos that are south facing, and the Vaudésire, which is north facing, it was all ready for pickup roughly at the same time, between 2 or 3 days, let's say. Now, today, the difference between the south facing Clos and Grenouille and the Vaudésire is much longer. It's very often, quite regularly, you have to wait almost 1 week after picking up the Clos and Grenouille before going and pick up the Vaudésire. So this time is totally changing. But what's changing is that it's the Clos and Grenouille that we have to pick earlier. It's not the Vaudésire that is later, actually. So it is very interesting. Yeah.
So your secret message there is the Vaudésire is the one to watch for the future. It's your future proofing of climate change.
That's it. Yeah, right. Got it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Guillaume. I think that will answer a lot of questions about Chablis in the 2019 vintage for our customers and our friends. So I really appreciate your time, and I really hope that I get out to visit you in November this year. Let's just hope they get the vaccines.
It would be. Definitely. No, in November it will be possible. I can't imagine that it's not possible.
We'll touch wood now and hope.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
I'm in my office. It's the only part of the domain when we have some wood. So
keep your hands firmly on it.
Touch it as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Guillaume.
Yeah.
Have a lovely day. Brilliant.
You're welcome. You too.